It started with the sound of metal hitting the floor, a loud, hollow clang that echoed through the room and into the cavity of my chest. My oxygen tank, he had thrown it, just like that, like trash. And that sound was the beginning of the end for him. My name is Margaret Hollis. I'm 72 years old, and I was diagnosed with end-stage COPD 3 years ago. Breathing is no longer something I do mindlessly. It's a conscious, painful effort that comes with every second. I live alone, or I used to, until my nephew Thomas moved in to help. That was the word he used, help. But what he really meant was control. Thomas came to me after his parents died in a car crash. He was 26, then broke aimless and full of resentment. At first I welcomed him. I thought maybe he just needed stability, someone to believe in him. But over the weeks, the mask came off. He made it clear he saw me not as family, but as a stepping stone to something else, my house, my money, maybe just a sense of dominance. He would mutter things like, "Why are you still alive anyway?" when he thought I couldn't hear him. And when he thought I could, he said worse. I became the ghost in my own home. He disconnected the landline to save costs, locked my phone, rearranged furniture to block my access. But I endured. I had known storms in life before, lost, betrayal, pain, and I learned long ago that some people only understand silence when it ends in thunder. That day, I had asked for help getting my oxygen tank moved from the living room to my bedroom. My strength was fading fast, and I could feel the air becoming thinner in my lungs. Thomas rolled his eyes and snapped, "Why don't you just die already?" I flinched, not because I hadn't heard worse, but because I finally realized he meant it. Then he did it. He picked up the tank and with a flick of anger I'll never forget, hurled it across the room. It slammed against the floor and rolled away, hissing softly as it leaked. I was frozen in my chair, lips parted, unable to breathe, unable to move, unable to cry out. My heart pounded, but my body betrayed me. He stormed off, slamming the door behind him. And as the silence settled, I knew this wasn't just neglect. This was an execution, slow, cruel, and calculated. But what Thomas didn't know, what he never even considered, was that I had prepared for this. Not because I expected kindness from him, but because I had spent the last 6 months documenting every cruel word, every theft, every shove, and I had one more breath left for a plan he would never see coming. I didn't sleep that night. The walls of my bedroom, once painted a calming pale blue, seemed to press in on me as though they too were suffocating. Without the oxygen tank, I had to rely on shallow breaths through a failing pair of lungs. My body trembled not only from lack of air, but from something deeper: rage, betrayal, and a glimmer of satisfaction. Because I wasn't entirely powerless. 6 months before Thomas moved in, I had started keeping a digital diary. My doctor warned me that as my condition worsened, so would my vulnerability. I didn't want to be a burden to anyone, but I also didn't want to be prey. So I started recording everything: audio logs, video clips from the old nanny cam hidden in the bookshelf, even screenshots of my bank account after Thomas borrowed money. I never expected to use them. I thought maybe one day someone would find them after I passed. But now, with each breath feeling like it might be my last, I knew it was time to set things in motion. But first I had to survive the night. I dragged myself off the recliner and onto the floor, crawling like a wounded animal. Every inch hurt. My head pounded, my throat tightened. But eventually I reached the corner drawer in my nightstand. Inside, under a stack of napkins, was an emergency inhaler hidden from Thomas months ago after he lost the last one. I gasped the first spray. It burned. The second, barely any relief. The third, enough. Enough to get to the old tablet I'd taped behind the dresser. It lit up with a blink. Password protected. Facial recognition. My face, though gaunt and pale, still worked. I opened the truth folder. Inside were files named by date and time, my voice narrating every act of cruelty, every moment of silence. October 2nd, he threw my meal on the floor. December 11th. He took my debit card, said I didn't need it anymore, and most damning of all tonight, he threw away my oxygen tank. But the masterpiece was the message I'd recorded 2 weeks ago. I had a feeling this day would come. I had even rehearsed my tone, my pacing. A farewell, yes, but a farewell with consequences. I attached the video file to a scheduled email addressed to his workplace, our family lawyer, and 3 of my late husband's old journalist friends, scheduled to send at 9 a.m. sharp. As the tablet returned to black, I laid on the floor, coughing dizzy tears wetting my cheeks, not from sadness but from resolve. Let him sleep peacefully tonight. Let him wake up tomorrow to a world flipped on its head, because when he hears my last words, he won't be able to unhear them. And he'll scream. The storm outside had quieted by morning, but the storm inside my house was just beginning. At 8:57 a.m., I was already awake, sitting in my chair, with a blanket wrapped around my frail legs and a glass of water trembling in my hand. I had made it through the night, just barely. The emergency inhaler gave me enough breath to live enough to witness what I'd set into motion. I heard his heavy footsteps descending the stairs, careless as always. He yawned loudly, shuffled into the kitchen, and opened the fridge. I waited. Then 9:00 a.m. arrived. My tablet lying silently on the table next to me buzzed once, scheduled message sent. And then just minutes later, I heard the first ping on his phone, then another, then several more. Thomas walked into the living room chewing toast, scrolling casually through his notifications until he stopped dead. His face, once smug and indifferent, suddenly drained of color. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, eyes scanning the screen. I didn't answer. He looked up, his eyes narrow and accusing. "Did you send something?" I still didn't answer. I didn't need to. He tapped the screen, furiously opened the video. My voice echoed through the room, strong, clear, deliberate. "Hello. If you're seeing this, I may already be gone, or perhaps not. Either way, it means Thomas Hollis has finally gone too far." He dropped the phone. The toast fell from his hand and landed near the foot of my chair. I watched him scramble to pause the video, but he couldn't. The message was locked to play through. "You may think I'm just an old woman with dying lungs, but I've seen everything, and I've recorded it. Every cruel word, every stolen dollar, every moment of violence and neglect." His hands shook. "You're bluffing," he growled, but his voice lacked certainty. Then came the real blow, the part I knew would crush whatever power he thought he had over me. "This message, along with all supporting evidence, has been sent to my attorney, Mr. Charles Emerson, local law enforcement, the Social Protection Agency, and Channel 7 Investigative News. By the time you finish this video, they will already know everything." Thomas backed away like the walls were caving in. His breathing picked up. Sweat formed on his forehead. "This house, which you hope to inherit, has been placed in a trust. You are not listed. My will has been updated. You get nothing. Nothing but the memory of what you did to someone who loved you." He screamed, a raw, guttural, panicked scream like a wounded animal cornered. It came from somewhere deep within him, the kind of scream only truth can rip from a man. Then silence. He stared at me, trembling. "Why? Why would you do this to me?" I looked up at him, frail, yes, but finally free. "Because you made me die before I was dead," I whispered. And now he was the one who couldn't breathe. He stood frozen, pale and shaking as my voice on the video finished its last few words. Then came the silence. But it wasn't peaceful. Thomas turned away from me like I was radioactive. His steps were frantic, aimless. He snatched his phone off the floor and began calling someone, probably the lawyer, or maybe one of his sleazy friends, to ask what the hell to do next. His hands trembled so much, he fumbled the phone twice before locking himself in the bathroom. I could still hear him shouting through the door. "She's lying, she's senile. That old witch doesn't even know how to send an email." Oh, but I did. I knew far more than he ever gave me credit for. People like Thomas always underestimate those they think are weak, especially when that weakness comes wrapped in gray hair and oxygen tubes. I closed my eyes and breathed as deeply as I could. The air was still thin without my tank, but I had enough now. just enough to make it to the couch where I kept a backup emergency bottle hidden behind the cushions months ago. I had placed it there, not to save my life, but to make sure I could watch his world burn down while I lived to see it. I pressed the valve, let the oxygen rush in, and within seconds the fog in my brain cleared. Thomas burst from the bathroom just as my phone, a separate one he didn't know about, began to ring. It was Charles Emerson, my lawyer. "Margaret," he said, calm and stern, "we received your message. Authorities have been alerted. I've also forwarded the video to the press as you requested." I didn't even have to speak. He knew the plan. We'd rehearsed this for months. I glanced up and caught Thomas staring at me in disbelief. "You will plan this." I nodded. But why, he asked, voice cracking, the anger now replaced with something that almost sounded like fear. And I told him, not with venom, but with truth. "Because you looked me in the eyes every day and treated me like garbage. Because you watched me suffocate and smiled. Because you made me believe my life had no meaning." Tears welled up in his eyes, but I wasn't moved. Sympathy had long been burned away. Suddenly the doorbell rang. Thomas flinched like it was a gunshot. He looked at the door, then at me, then at the door again. He didn't move. But I did. I picked up my phone, hit a button, and my voice played once more, this time over the house speaker system. "To whoever hears this, know that the weak remember, and when we remember, we rise." He dropped to his knees. The sound of knocking grew louder, more urgent now. The world had come for him, and I was still here to witness it. He stayed on his knees like a guilty child, paralyzed by fear. His hands clutched his head, and his mouth moved wordlessly. I could tell he was trying to calculate to spin a story to salvage the ruins. But it was too late for damage control. The story was out, and the truth had teeth. The knocking turned into pounding. Police opened the door. He shot to his feet, wild-eyed. "What do I do?" he shouted, as if I were still his elderly aunt, too frail to do anything but forgive. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I simply pointed toward the door. He hesitated, torn between facing the law or bolting like the coward he always was. He turned toward the back door, but I spoke just loud enough to stop him. I told them everything. "If you run, they'll come harder. You know what's on that footage." He turned slowly to face me again, his face crumpled in helpless disbelief. "You were just supposed to die." The sentence hung in the air like a curse, and it stung not because it was a surprise, but because it was confirmation. The boy I once bounced on my knee had wished me gone for convenience. I was nothing but dead weight to him. Until now. He opened the door with shaking hands. 2 officers stood outside, stone-faced. Thomas Hollis, one asked. "Yeah." "You're under investigation for elder abuse, financial exploitation, and attempted manslaughter. We have a warrant to search the premises and seize all related devices." He barely managed a nod before they stepped in. One officer cuffed him, while the other began inspecting the room. The tablet still lay on the table. The video paused. The officer picked it up and reviewed the file. "Strong evidence," he said, glancing my way. "You did the right thing, ma'am." I wanted to laugh or cry, maybe both. Thomas whimpered as they led him out the door. He glanced back at me one last time, face twisted in something like grief. But he wasn't grieving for me. He was grieving for himself, his future, his image, his inheritance, all of it gone. As the door slammed shut behind him, I felt a wave of emotion I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Not because he was gone, but because I hadn't let myself disappear. I wheeled myself to the window, watching the squad car drive off with him in the back seat. Sirens silent. Just the soft hum of justice rolling away. Inside the house was quiet. The tension had dissolved. The air, still thin, felt lighter. I was still dying. Nothing had changed that. But for once I didn't feel powerless. For once I had reminded the world even those with broken lungs can roar. The hours that followed were a blur of voices, paperwork, and visits from officers, social workers, and even a reporter from Channel 7. They all wanted to know my side of the story, how a woman with a failing pair of lungs had managed to trap her abuser so perfectly. But I wasn't interested in fame. I wasn't interested in sympathy either. I only wanted truth to be louder than silence. After they left, the house felt foreign quiet in a way I hadn't experienced since before Thomas came. There was no stomping, no muttering insults, no sudden slamming of doors. just the soft whir of my emergency oxygen tank and the sound of my own breathing. I sat by the window watching the clouds roll in again. A nurse from adult services arrived with fresh supplies. Her eyes were kind, and when she looked around the house, I could see the pain in her expression. She had probably seen worse, but I could tell she knew exactly what had happened here. We talked for a while about my condition, about next steps. I told her I didn't know how much time I had left, a month, maybe 2, but I also told her I'd never felt more alive. She asked me why I waited so long to expose him. I smiled softly and said, because revenge only works when the timing cuts deepest. And I meant that. Thomas thought he was safe because I was sick, because my body was weak, because my voice was fading. But he forgot one thing: people die with dignity when they choose to fight back, not when they surrender. As evening approached, my phone buzzed with a call from my lawyer. Charles's voice was calm, proud even. Social services will place a permanent flag on Thomas's name. He won't be able to work and care again. Your story is spreading. You've helped more than you know. I nodded, tears forming but never falling. Not tears of sadness, not anymore. Before bed, I opened the last file on my tablet, the recording that played that morning. I watched it one more time, not to relive the pain, but to remind myself what survival looks like. The woman on the screen didn't look frail to me. She looked like someone who had waited patiently, quietly, and then struck like thunder. I turned off the light and laid down oxygen mask in place. For the first time in years, I fell asleep without fear. Not because I was cured, but because I had finally been heard. And Thomas, he would remember my last words until his own last breath. If my story teaches you anything, let it be this: silence does not mean weakness. Illness does not mean irrelevance. I spent too long believing that because my body was fading, so was my worth. That was Thomas's greatest weapon, making me feel like I had none left. But the truth is, even in our weakest state, we have strength. Strength in our words, in our records, in our ability to endure and outsmart those who think we're already gone. To anyone suffering in silence, document everything. Trust your instincts, and never underestimate the power of timing. When the moment is right, your truth can tear down walls they thought would hold forever. And to those who mistreat the vulnerable, beware. The quiet ones are always listening, and sometimes we speak last because we want our words to echo. I may be dying, but I chose how I lived and how I was remembered.